Seraphine Voss turned 18 on a cold morning when the sky was still purple and the stars had not yet decided to leave. Every wolf in Ethermore knew what 18 meant. It meant your wolf came forward. It meant you shifted for the first time, and when you did, the moon goddess pressed her mark into your shoulder like a seal into warm wax. The mark told the world who you were and which pack you belonged to. Seraphine had been waiting for that morning her whole life. She stood in the circle of first shift with the other young wolves of her village. The stone ground was cold beneath her bare feet. Her mother stood at the edge of the crowd, and when Seraphine looked over at her, her mother smiled. That was the last smile her mother would give her for a very long time. The shift came like a wave that had been building for years. Seraphine felt it roll through her bones, felt her wolf rise up for the first time, felt a light pour down from somewhere far above, like water falling on dry earth. Then it was done. She stood still while the elders came forward to read her mark. Elder Draven was the first to see it. He was a tall man with a white beard and eyes that had always reminded Seraphine of cold ash. He looked at her shoulder and his face changed. The color left it. The crowd saw his face change. That was how the silence began. Seraphine could not see her own mark, but she could feel it. It did not feel wrong. It felt like something enormous and ancient had pressed its hand against her skin with great care. It felt important. But Elder Draven stepped back from her. He said the mark was split, a silver crescent divided by a black line down the middle. He said in all his years, in all the records of Ethermore, such a mark meant only one thing. He said the words slowly, so the whole crowd could hear it. Cursed. The crowd did not shout. They did not need to. The silence was louder than any shout could have been. Seraphine looked at her mother. Her mother was looking at the ground. By ancient law, a cursed wolf could not belong to a pack. A cursed wolf was dangerous. A cursed wolf was a wound in the community, something that needed to be cut away before it spread. Elder Draven read the law the way a man reads something he has rehearsed many times, in a flat and final voice. They brought out the iron band. They heated it until the metal glowed red. They pressed it to Seraphine's left wrist and held it there. She did not cry out. She pressed her teeth together and held completely still, because she had decided in those last few seconds that she would not give them a sound to remember. When it was done, the brand was a ring of blackened skin. The mark of the outcast. She looked one more time at her mother. Her mother still would not look up. Seraphine walked out of the village alone that morning, with nothing except the clothes she was wearing and the mark the moon goddess had put on her shoulder, which no one could explain, and no one had bothered to try. For 3 years, she lived in the borderlands. The borderlands were the edge of the world, or close enough. They sat between the great wolf territories, unclaimed by any pack, ignored by any law. Rogues drifted through them. Exiles like Seraphine built small, quiet lives in the ruins that no one else wanted. There were no elders in the borderlands. There were no marks that mattered. Seraphine found an old stone watchtower that had not belonged to anyone for at least 100 years. She cleaned it out. She fixed what she could fix. She learned which plants grew along the river below and what they could do. She traded remedies to the border villages for food and supplies. She asked no one for anything she did not trade for fairly. Her wolf was still inside her. She could feel it every day. A presence like a hand resting on her shoulder from the inside. It was patient. It did not push. She was the one who kept it quiet. She was the one who decided, after everything that had happened, that she was not ready to let it out again. She told herself she was fine. She had learned to believe almost anything she told herself. Then came the storm. It arrived on a night in late autumn, when the rain was cold and the wind had sharp edges. Seraphine was inside the tower when she heard the fighting outside. She heard the sounds wolves make when they are in their shifted form, and something has gone very wrong. She heard a man cry out in a voice that told her he was badly hurt. She did not think. She grabbed her pack of medicines and went outside. In the clearing below her tower, there were soldiers. Their cloaks bore the crest of the royal house of Aethermore, the mark of the Alpha King himself. They had been chasing a rogue wolf, and the chase had gone badly. One man was on the ground, with a gash across his side, that was bleeding too fast. Seraphine pushed past 2 stunned soldiers and knelt beside him. She worked quickly. She had done this many times before, but never with people watching her this closely. Never with soldiers standing around her with their hands near their weapons. She packed the wound, mixed what she had in her pack, applied pressure in the right places, and spoke quietly to the injured man to keep him focused. His name was Caden Rourke. He told her this while she worked, as if having something to say was the only thing keeping him awake. He was the commander of the Alpha King's army. He had sharp, dark eyes and a face that had clearly been through many hard things, and he looked at Seraphine the way a man looks at something he cannot quite explain. By the time the bleeding slowed, the rain had stopped. The other soldiers had dealt with the rogue. Caden sat up carefully and looked at the woman who had saved his life. He saw the brand on her wrist. He did not say anything about it. He said, "What is your name?" She told him. Then she picked up her pack and went back inside her tower. She did not think she would ever see any of them again. She was wrong. King Evander Stormveil had ruled Ethermore for 5 years. He was 28 years old and had taken the throne before he was ready, the way most kings do, after his father died with no warning and no instructions. He had learned to rule the way you learn to swim when someone drops you in deep water. He had learned quickly, and he had learned to keep his face still. He was not cruel, but he was not soft either. He believed in order. He believed in law. He believed that every problem, including the problem of himself, could be managed with enough discipline. The one thing he could not manage was his wolf. A king's wolf was supposed to recognize his mate the way a compass finds north. It was supposed to be simple and clear and certain. But Evander's wolf had stayed completely silent for 5 years. Through every formal introduction, every diplomatic meeting, every gathering of noble daughters brought forward by hopeful families, his wolf had said nothing. His council was worried. His allies were cautious. His wolf's silence was beginning to feel less like a delay and more like an answer he did not want to hear. Then Caden came back from the borderlands. Caden told him about the exile who had saved his life. He described what she had done calmly and precisely, the way a soldier gives a report. But when he reached the end, he paused. "Her scent," Caden said. "I have never smelled anything like it. I cannot describe it properly. But when she was working beside me, my wolf went completely still. Not afraid. Just still, like it was listening." Evander was quiet. That night, his wolf stirred for the first time in 5 years. He told his council he was inspecting the rogue situation near the borderlands. He went without announcement, with only a small escort that he left a good distance back. He followed the information Caden had given him until he reached the old tower. He smelled her before he saw her. The scent hit him like the first light after a long darkness. Not soft, not gentle, but real, in the way that makes your eyes water, because you had forgotten what real looked like. His wolf did not stir this time. It rose. It rose all the way to the surface, and said one single word, in a language older than speech, in the place behind his chest, where wolves keep the things that matter most. "Mine." He stepped into the clearing. Seraphine came out of the tree line from the other side at the same moment, carrying a bundle of herbs from the river. She saw a tall man in plain clothing standing in front of her tower. She did not recognize him. She set down her herbs and reached for the knife at her belt. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone who would like to talk," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. People who want to talk do not stand in front of other people's towers without being invited. He almost smiled. He was not sure when the last time was that someone had spoken to him like that. They talked for a long time that first day, or rather, she asked questions and he answered them without telling her who he was. She was sharp. She noticed everything. She was watching him the way a person watches something that has not proven itself safe yet, and he found he did not mind that. It was honest. On the second day he came back. She was less surprised to see him than she had been the first time. On the third day, he told her who he was. She was quiet for a moment. Then she made the short, flat sound that he eventually understood was her version of a laugh when something is more painful than funny. "The Alpha King," she said. "Come to the borderlands to find a cursed exile. Does your council know you are here?" "No. That is the first honest thing about this entire situation," she said. He asked her to come to the capital, just for a few days. He said it was because she would be safer there than in the borderlands, which was true, but not the whole truth. She said no. He came back the next day. She said no again, but she made him tea, which he took as a sign of something. On the fourth day, the rogues came. There were 6 of them, and they hit the tower at dusk, when the light was low and confusing. Evander fought 3 of them, Seraphine fought the other 3, and then something happened that she had not planned and could not have predicted. Her wolf came forward. It came the way water breaks through an old wall, not gradually, but all at once, in a single moment that could not be stopped. She shifted before she had time to decide to shift, and what emerged was not the frightened creature she had spent 3 years afraid of. Her wolf was the color of moonlight on fresh snow. It was larger than it had any right to be, and when it turned to face the remaining rogues, something came off it like heat off stone in summer, a pressure, a presence, an authority that had no name, but had existed since before names were made. The rogues stopped, every one of them. They lowered their heads to the ground. They were not afraid of Evander. They were not submitting to his wolf or his kingship, or anything he had done in the fight. They were submitting to her. Evander stood very still. After the rogues had fled, Seraphine shifted back and sat down heavily against the tower wall. She was shaking. She held her marked wrist against her chest and stared at the ground. Evander sat down beside her. He did not try to explain what had happened. He did not try to tell her it was fine. He just sat there until the shaking slowed. After a long time, he said, "I do not think the elders were right about what your mark means." "You do not know what it means," she said. Her voice was steady now. "No," he said, "but I know what I just saw, and I know what my wolf just did." She looked at him. "It went still," he said. "Completely still. The way it does when it is in the presence of something it recognizes as greater than itself." He paused. "My wolf has never done that. Not for anyone." She did not answer right away. She looked back at the ground. Then she said, "I will come to the capital. Not for you. I want to look at the old records. I want to know what my mark actually means." "That is fair," he said. "I am not doing this on your terms," she said. "I know," he said. "The palace was not built for someone like Seraphine. The floors were too polished. The people were too careful with their faces. The nobility watched her, the way people watch something that has been let inside, which they believe should have stayed outside. But the library was extraordinary. She spent her first 3 days almost entirely in it. She went through archives that had not been opened in decades. She found references in old texts that had been filed badly, as if someone had wanted them to be hard to find. And in the oldest records, in a volume that had no title on its cover, and had been shelved at the very back of a section that no one seemed to reference anymore, she found it. The dual crescent. It was described in full. It was not a mark of corruption. It was not a mark of rejection. The text called it the rarest mark in a generation, the mark of the moon's vessel. A wolf chosen not to serve a single pack but to serve all of them. A wolf the moon goddess set apart not because they were less, but because they were meant for something the ordinary structure of packs was too small to hold. The Elder Council had known about this. The records made that clear. There were notes in the margins of the older texts, written in a hand she did not recognize. Someone had read these pages, and understood them, and then filed them somewhere no one would look, and said nothing. They had branded her, because a vessel answers to no elder. A vessel answers only to the moon. And that terrified people, who had built their entire lives around being the ones that other people answered to. She sat with the book open in her lap for a long time. Then she went to find Evander. She told him everything she had found. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, his face was very still in the way that she had come to understand meant he was holding something tightly inside. He said, "Elder Draven is in the capital." "I know," she said. "He knows you are here. He is already speaking to the noble houses about you." "I know that too," she said. He looked at her. "You are not afraid." "I have been afraid every day for 3 years," she said. "I have decided I am done letting that make my decisions." Elder Draven moved faster than she expected. Within 2 days, he had gathered enough support among the noble houses to invoke an ancient law called the Trial of Worth. The trial had 3 parts. It tested endurance, combat, and spirit. The spiritual test, which came last, was a direct communion with the moon through something called moonfire, which was exactly what it sounded like. Wolves who failed it did not survive. Draven presented it as a legal matter. He said that if Seraphine was truly what she claimed, she had nothing to fear. He said it in the smooth and practiced voice of a man who had never once in his life had anything to fear, and therefore had no understanding of what he was asking. Seraphine accepted. The night before the trial, Evander came to her rooms. He stood in the doorway and said he would find another way. He said she did not have to do this. He said he would take the law apart piece by piece if she would give him time. She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "They took everything from me because they were afraid of what I was. I am not running from that anymore." He was quiet. Then he crossed the room and took her branded wrist very gently in both of his hands. He said that when all of this was done, if she wanted, he could have the brand removed. The best healers in Ethermore. It would fade completely. She looked down at his hands, holding her wrist. "I do not want it removed," she said. "I want to keep it, so I never forget what they tried to make me believe about myself." He did not speak. He lowered his head and pressed his lips to the brand, and that was the first moment in 3 years that Seraphine felt the wall she had built around herself begin to crack. The arena was full. Every member of the court was there. The public filled the upper galleries. Seraphine stood in the center of it all and thought that the ground felt the same under her feet as the stone circle in her home village had felt, cold and solid, and indifferent to whatever was about to happen. She passed the first challenge, and the second, on nothing but 3 years of hard living and a will that had been tested into something iron. She was bleeding by the time they reached the third. She was tired, but she was standing. The moonfire rose around her. It came up from the ground in a circle of silver flames that gave off no heat. The crowd was completely silent. Elder Draven stood at the edge of the arena. Evander stood at the other edge, and he was not moving, but every part of him was coiled tight. Seraphine stood inside the moonfire and felt it looking at her, the way very old things look at you when they already know the answer and are only waiting to see if you do. She did not run, she did not speak. She stood still and let herself be seen. The fire changed. It did not consume her. It moved away from her, bending outward like grass in wind, making room. The mark on her shoulder blazed with a light that was white and gold at the same time, so bright that people at the edge of the arena lifted their hands to shield their eyes. And then there was a presence. No one could see it, but every wolf in that arena felt it, a weight in the air above the moonfire, something immense and ancient and entirely without anger. It pressed down over the whole arena like a hand over water. Every wolf lowered their head. Even Evander, even the members of the noble houses who had voted to put Seraphine in this arena. Elder Draven did not lower his head. He said in a thin voice that this proved nothing, that dark forces could create false signs, that the court should not be deceived. Evander said one word: kneel. He did not shout it, he did not need to. The word came from somewhere deeper than his voice. It came from his wolf, which was looking at Elder Draven with the full weight of 5 years of rule, and everything older than that behind it. Elder Draven knelt. The trial was over. What came after took months. The Elder Council was stripped of the authority they had claimed over bloodline marks, an authority, as Seraphine's research had shown, that had never been granted to them in the first place. The suppressed texts were made public. 3 other wolves in Ethermore, still living, came forward. They had been branded wrongfully, their marks misread or deliberately misclassified, their lives sent sideways by men who were afraid of what they could not control. It was not a clean ending. There was no single moment where everything became simple and right. There were long arguments in formal halls, and difficult meetings, and people who had done wrong who had to face what they had done, and people who had been wronged who had to figure out what came next. But the day Seraphine stood in the great hall of the palace and was named Luna Queen, it was not because she had performed well, or pleased the right people, or convinced anyone to take a chance on her. It was because the moon had already made her decision 3 years ago, in a village circle, and all the branding in the world had not changed it. The night after the ceremony, Seraphine stood on the highest parapet of the palace and looked at the moon. It was full and very close-looking, the way the moon sometimes seems in autumn, as if it has leaned down toward the earth. Evander stood beside her. He did not say anything. He had learned when to be quiet. The brand on her wrist caught the moonlight. She did not put her sleeve down over it. She thought about the girl who had stood in the village circle and felt the moon press her hand against her shoulder with such care. She thought about 3 years in a stone tower and how she had learned to be alone, and how being alone had made her into someone who could not be broken by anything that had already tried. She thought about an old book filed at the back of a shelf by someone who had been afraid of the truth inside it. They had told her she was cursed. They had said it so loudly and so often that she had spent years wondering if they were right. They were not right. They had simply been afraid, and fear, when it is given enough authority, can speak so loudly that it sounds exactly like the truth. The moon stayed where it was, full and still, and watching. Seraphine let herself be watched. She had nothing left to hide.